This is Old Man Barnes back again, and as with all time travel stories, I'm going to tell you the end of the story, and then we'll go back and tell how we got to the end. Back in the 80s, with some students of mine, we did an experiment on tomato plants, and what we learned was when these tomato seeds had only water applied over 10 weeks, basically this is what happened. Over a 4-week period, they grew to about the 10 centimeter mark. Then they leveled out and stayed at about the 10 centimeter mark for the whole 10-week period. They were kind of puny. 10 centimeters divided by 2.54, that'll tell you how many inches they were. They weren't very large. At the same time, we were doing a scientific experiment, and we had an experimental group, and they did about the same thing. They grew about the same amount over the first 4 weeks, but they had a pretty large spike and went up to about the 30 centimeter mark and plateaued out for the remainder of the 10 weeks. Here's kind of what led up to this whole deal in the beginning. I had been seeing advertisements on TV from this amazing plant food, and I thought, man, if I could get my students to help me grow some tomato plants, I could have the most luscious, bodacious, delicioso tomatoes ever. And I could get my students to help me. That could not hardly work out any better. My hypothesis was that if we applied 1 gram of this fertilizer per 4 ounces of water on a weekly basis over 10 weeks, that we would, with this independent variable over 10 weeks, that we would get a responding growth in height measured in centimeters. This is plotted on the y-axis. This is called the dependent variable, the responding variable, growth in centimeters. We also were just about certain that we were going to reject the null hypothesis. Basically, that means that the null hypothesis would basically just say that the fertilizer would have no effect. And there would be no difference between the control and the experimental groups. So we were hoping to reject that, and we did. The fertilizer group got a very nice difference in height, centimeters. Yes, that happened. When we set up the experiment, we set up, as far as I can remember, we had 5 to 10 control cups in a western window in this high school where I was teaching. We made sure that in these 12-ounce cups we had the same amount, same kind of soil, and because it was all the cups were in the same window, we were able to, without effort, control the lighting and the temperature. And of course, the experimental cups also got the same amount, 4 ounces of water on a weekly basis. Well, I've shown you the data. The data showed that the fertilizer did have quite a nice effect. Yay for that. That was very good. But let's talk about the conclusions. Yes, we were able to accept the alternative hypothesis that there would be a response in growth measured in centimeters as a result of the fertilizer added to the water, 1 gram added to 4 ounces of water weekly. We supported that. We also rejected the null hypothesis. The null hypothesis said basically there was going to be no difference between these two groups. There was a big difference between these, so we were able to reject the null hypothesis. Some things that we learned that were very important, however, were that these plants, they grew vertical, but they had very little lateral growth. And probably about 2/3 of the way through the experiment, even the experimental plants, well, actually the experimental plants more so than the controls, as they were tall and leggy, began to fall over. They weren't really that healthy. The controls were not that healthy either, though. They were kind of tall and skinny. They weren't just short and luxuriant in comparison. So we should make that statement right now. What happened, which I haven't really divulged to you yet, the drama in all this goes as such. About halfway through the experiment, my principal downstairs reminded me that he would love to have some of these beautiful, promising tomato plants for his garden. Well, at about 10 weeks along, my plants promptly, simultaneously died. And as I look back at this, I think that what happened is as these plants grew, they were requiring more water. If I had to do it over again, I probably would have possibly increased the amount of water for the controls and the experimentals, probably 2 to 4 ounces, just making sure that we did the same to both. That would have worked. So I think the thing that I'm trying to get across to you is that with experiments, with the scientific method, we can support and reject hypotheses. But at the same time, we can also learn some new information. We didn't, even though we got growth, we didn't really get any decent results we wanted. And actually, in the end, we experienced disaster. And that's what experiments do. They teach us things. Please remember to subscribe, like, comment, and share. That is what creates a community on YouTube. Keep coming back.